UFOs are becoming widely discussed in mainstream media, and there's a very biblical reason for this. And I hope that today's video will open your eyes to see exactly what's going on. All right, folks, let's get into this. The subject today is UFOs. Yes, unidentified flying objects. And yes, let me talk about this for just a second. The Rapture. Now, let me tell you what sort of inspired me doing this video. I watched the beginning of an interview between Joe Rogan and Tucker Carlson. Now, mind you, I have only watched the first 20 minutes of it, but that's all I needed to be inspired to have this discussion. Now, for those of you that don't know, and by the way, I'm going to show you the portion that got me really interested of that interview. But for those of you that don't know, Tucker Carlson made the discussion of UFOs very popular in the mainstream media when he was at Fox News. And when that discussion started ensuing, then CNN started talking about it, CNBC, MSNBC, and they all are still talking about UFO sightings on a regular basis and things that are going on with UFOs. And there has been an exponential increase in the discussion of unidentified flying objects. I'm going to just say this right off the bat. I believe fully that there is a reason for this, and it is tied directly to a couple of facts. Number one, I believe that we are in the last days, and we are getting closer and closer and closer and closer to the coming of Christ for his church. The other reason why I think this is happening is because deception is at an all-time high, and there's lots of deception that's being used to get people away from what conventional biblical thinking teaches us and into something that will deceive people away from what we know the Bible actually tells us concerning what this is all about. Now, I'm going to read this article to you. This is from the BBC. I'm only read portions of it, and then I'm going to play a video for you that came right out of this article. And it's really, really interesting, and I'll get into a little bit more of the specifics and kind of hone down for you because so much of this is going to make sense. And by the way, we are going to have a discussion about Ezekiel chapter 1 once we finish this. So this article says, U.S. says UFO sightings likely secret military tests. Now, this is a little earlier in the year, about less than a month ago. This is in March when this was published. And the article says this: a spike in UFO sightings in the 1950s and 60s was caused by tests of advanced U.S. spy planes and space technology. And this is, of course, the Pentagon that concluded this. Now, the article starts off by saying officials said there was no evidence that the U.S. government had encountered alien life. Most sightings of UFOs were ordinary objects from Earth, according to reports submitted to Congress on Friday. But Pentagon officials accepted that the research won't quell popular beliefs about alien visitors. And this is a quote from the Pentagon, right? This was a quote from the report. It says, the proliferation of television programs, books, movies, and the vast amount of interest in social media content centered around UAP-related topics most likely have influenced the public conversation on this topic and reinforced these beliefs within some sections of the population. This is what the report says. The report is part of a broad public attempt by the United States government to examine UFOs, or as officials call them, unidentified anomalous phenomena. Isn't that ridiculous? It goes from unidentified flying objects to now unidentified anomalous phenomena. It's just crazy. Anyway, issued by the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, the AARO, the report noted that public opinion has been swayed by pop culture. And this is the quote, a particularly persistent narrative, the researchers said, is that the government has recovered spacecraft and aliens or alien remains and conspired to keep its alien research activities a secret. Now, the Pentagon spokesman said the officials had approached the report in an open-minded way, but had simply found no evidence of extraterrestrial visitors. This is a quote from Major General Pat Ryder as reporters are being addressed. And this is the quote. It says, all investigative efforts at all levels of classification concluded that most sightings were ordinary objects and phenomena, and the result of misidentification. So ridiculous, you guys. It goes on to say the researchers hunted down rumors about alien spacecraft and found, for instance, that alleged 1961 leaked memo about UFOs was inauthentic and that an alien spacecraft sample collected by UAP investigating organization was not made of an otherworldly material, but instead it was made mostly of magnesium, zinc, and bismuth. The report lists new technologies that researchers believe that led to spikes in UAP reports in the 1950s and the 1960s. Okay, so basically this is the government making a very, very sort of expounded effort to say that we really can explain what all of these are. This is all in your imagination. These are conspiracy theories, but yet the sightings of these things are increasing, and they're increasing dramatically and rapidly. Now, I believe that these are demonic appearances. I believe that there's a lot of, now don't get me wrong, some of this stuff is clearly military based, okay? We know that. There's a lot of this stuff that's, military experiments. There's all kinds of things like this, but so much of this stuff is spiritual. Now, what really got me thinking about this was Tucker Carlson, when he first started reporting on this, was reporting it from the basis of this was, experimental technology that the United States is using. Oh, this is the type of technology that other foreign governments are using, or this could be alien spacecraft in one way or another that we just are not aware of. Maybe somebody in another planet somewhere else that we haven't heard of or we don't really understand. But as he started digging into it, he came to a completely new conclusion. And while all of that's going on, then we have videos like this that surface where you have a whistleblower claims that non-human bodies were recovered from a UFO crash site. Now, this is before a congressional hearing. Let me play this video for you. And then after we play this video, then I'm going to go back and play a portion of what Tucker Carlson said to Joe Rogan. And I'm going to tell you what I think is really happening. And I think you'll agree once we explore the Bible together. So let's play this video right here.
How do you know that these were not our aircraft?
Some of the behaviors that we saw in a working area, we would see these objects being at 0.0 Mach, that's zero airspeed, over certain pieces of the ground. So what that means, just like a river, if you throw a bobber in, it's going to float downstream. These objects were staying completely stationary in Category 4 hurricane winds.
Okay, by the way, just so you know, pay special attention to the description that he's given concerning some of the movements that they've observed or the lack of movement, because I want you to keep mind of those things when we go over this passage in Ezekiel. I kid you not, okay? And it's astounding what Tucker says about this. It's mind-blowing to show how there's a spiritual awakening happening. It's not fully there yet, but the people are beginning to wake up to the truth. But let's listen to what he continues to say.
Objects would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach, and they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
You've said that the U.S. has intact spacecraft. You said that the government has alien bodies or alien species. Have you seen the spacecraft?
I have to be careful to describe what I've seen firsthand and not in this environment, but I could answer that question behind closed doors. Yeah.
And have you seen any of the bodies?
That's something I've not witnessed myself.
Have you formed any general conclusions about what you think you experienced then?
Yes, I think what we experienced was, like I said, well beyond the material science and the capabilities that we had at the time, that we have currently, or that we're going to have in the next 10 to 20 years.
Mr. Gresh, finally, do you believe that our government is in possession of UAPs?
Absolutely, based on interviewing over 40 witnesses over 4 years.
If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies?
Okay, I just want to stop as we continue on with this line of questioning. Can you notice the fear that's in the eyes of this guy as he's seeking to answer these questions? They're hammering away at these questions, and you can tell he's definitely seen some things, but he's very hesitant to want to disclose these things because of what he's been read into. There's so much to this, you guys. This is unbelievable. But there's going to be more to say about this in just a second, but pay special attention to what happens here.
The pilots who piloted this craft.
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
It's just great. This is so, folks, this is the kind of thing that we are seeing surfacing more and more and more of. Now, let's take this and go a little bit deeper into pop culture and go over an interview with Joe Rogan. Now, this one is extremely important because it speaks to a much bigger issue, okay? So I'm going to play this for you here. It's really, really interesting. Take a listen to this and I'll comment on this. By the way, just a little bit of background on this. Tucker Carlson originally reported these things believing that there were actual aliens that were out there and actually spoke very vividly about the likelihood that we were seeing other beings, or we just don't really know what we're looking at, but we know that there's something that isn't based on what's on Earth here. And he began to change his mind about his approach with this. And he's going to talk about this on the Joe Rogan show. Let me play the portion of that for you and then we'll discuss it.
Million federal employees and another 10 million federal contractors, so who are effectively government employees but don't have civil service protection, for example.
By the way, the premise of this is there's a ton of government employees, lots of information in essence can easily get out, and he's just talking about how viable it is that a lot of these facts that are out there are real based on the collaboration of a lot of the information that's come out. Anyway, he's going to explain it. Let's take a listen.
So that's 12 million people in a country of 340 million working for the federal government. So it's kind of hard to overstate how big the federal government is and how well funded. And so to say the government this, the government that, no, of course, it's people within the government. But yeah, they're working on all kinds of things, obviously, that are classified. But in general, no, they can't control these objects. So no, it's not American technology.
Well, so the context that he's talking about here is he's talking about UFOs, and he's talking about how it's not American technology. He's going as far as to say it's not even foreign technology. He will actually go as far as to say that we're not even talking about aliens here. Watch what happens.
Or Russian or Chinese. It predates, all of that.
Well, some of it does, right? Like,
notice he said it predates all of that. It predates Russian technology, Chinese technology. Listen to where he's going with this. He's talking about it being spiritual. Now, some of you might say, well, James, why are you playing Tucker Carlson to be the authority on what's spiritual, what isn't? My point that I'm making here is that even the mainstream of people who are not completely spiritually aware or necessarily even religious for that matter are beginning to recognize that this stuff is very spiritual. This stuff is supernatural, okay? Let's listen on.
For sure, the Kenneth Arnold sightings, that was really early on. That was like the early 1950s. He was seeing these flying saucers, these discs that were moving over mountains.
Well, right. I mean, the prophet Ezekiel writes about it in the first chapter, wheels in the sky.
Yeah, that's a crazy one. Boy, when you read
it is crazy if you read.
It's funny. We're going to talk about that Ezekiel passage in just a second. We're not going to spend a lot of time expounding upon it, but I'm going to read that passage. It's funny that he mentions Ezekiel and that he uses Ezekiel to speak about these things that are being cited. But look what he goes on to say. This is really interesting.
It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And
a wheel within a wheel.
Not just, the Hebrew scriptures, it's all over every...
the Vedic texts.
Of course. So these are spiritual phenomenon. There's no evidence they're from another planet. I mean, I think that's the that's the lie, that they're from Mars. Look, space, the atmosphere is really well monitored, right? Both for defense reasons, but also because, it would be nice to know when asteroids are coming. And there's no evidence, has never been any evidence that there are lots of these objects, these vehicles coming into our atmosphere from somewhere else, some other planet. There's no evidence of that at all. So they're from here, and they've been here for thousands of years, whatever they are. And it's pretty clear to me that they're spiritual entities, whatever that means. They're supernatural, and which is to say supernatural means above the natural, above the observable nature. And they don't behave according to the laws of science as measured by people, and they've been here for a long time. And there's a ton of evidence they're under the ocean and under the ground. So like with that fact set, what do you conclude?
So he talks about all this stuff. He talks about some of the observable movements and so on and so forth. And then he talks about how he kind of backed off a little bit because he realized that what he was looking at was dark. Like he referred to it as just a ton of darkness, like evil, okay? Now, Joe Rogan gets really curious about this and he says, what do you mean by dark? Okay, so watch what happens here.
At all as a person. And I don't
what information did you get that made you feel like it's dark?
What's so dark? Well, first of all, the deception is always bad. Like lying is bad and it's bad not just in a legal sense in that it can be illegal to lie, but it's bad. It's like bad for you. Like it rots you. Like being a liar makes you a bad person. When you lie, you are serving evil. There's a moral quality to it that's inescapable. And very obvious, and only like advanced civilizations ignore that. Lying is bad. And so if you have lying at scale, which we have on this topic, it's inherently bad. Okay, so that's the first level. The deeper level is...
So lying at scale at this topic, it's inherently bad. This is a guy who is not even claiming to be an adamant believer who recognizes darkness in the wide-scale deception across our country and around the world regarding this issue of UFOs. Think about it, folks. They have to be deceptive about this. The devil and his demons have to be deceptive about this if they're going to create an explanation for why millions, if not maybe 1 billion plus Christians are just raptured. What happened? The aliens abducted them. Folks, think about the deception. Think about how the devil works. And this is a guy who is inherently not so spiritual, yet he recognizes the spirituality as reflected in the darkness that's involved in all of this. Look at what he says secondarily.
Okay, so if they're spiritual beings, which I believe they are, like it's a binary. They're either, you're on team good or team bad. You can assign any name to it you want, but like, what are these things?
If they're spiritual, they're either good or evil. If they're spiritual, they're either good or evil. He even recognizes that. And he's not a Bible guy. He's not spending time studying the Bible like I am. He's not looking at that stuff. But even Tucker Carlson recognizes what's going on. And I'm not putting Tucker down. I think Tucker's a brilliant man. Honestly. I mean, I kind of don't want to watch what he says about Israel. I heard he said some pretty bad things there, but that's another time, another day. But his observations are obvious. He's observing the obvious.
Are they good or bad? And I think some of them are bad. And if the U.S. government knows that, or elements, the people within the U.S. government know that, then they're serving a bad force.
The people within the U.S. government that know that, and I'll leave it alone. We don't have to watch any more of this video. He says there are people within the U.S. government that is keenly aware of this bad. They know who these things are. How many people in the U.S. government who work at very high levels that control a lot of people are probably people who worship the devil and function like literally in the hand of the enemy? Folks, they're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere. Let me read to you the Ezekiel passage that he was talking about, because this is really, really interesting. Talking about these angels that Ezekiel had witnessed, right? Look at this in verse 10. It says, "And the likeness of their faces, they four had the face of a man and the face of a lion on the right side, and they four had the face of an ox on the left side, and the four also the face of an eagle. Thus were their faces, and their wings were stretched upward. 2 wings, every one were joined one to another, and 2 covered their bodies." Notice this. "And they went every one straight forward whither the spirit was to go, and they went and they turned not when they went." In other words, they were just back, just like they weren't even turning. They weren't like turning their heads when they were turning. They were just, it was a very linear type of a movement, right? Notice this. Look what it goes on to say. "As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, like the appearance of lamps. It went up and down among the living creatures, and fire was bright out of the fire that went forth. That fire went forth lightning. And the living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning." Matter of fact, rapid speeds faster than the speed of light, or like the speed of light. Just boom, 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 boom. You can't do that in an airplane. You can't do that in a helicopter. You can't do that in a jet. Now, as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel upon the earth by the living creatures with his four faces. I mean, they're describing things that look like what we typically deem as a UFO, a saucer, right? The appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of a beryl, right? And they four had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as it were a wheel in the middle of a wheel. It's like it looks like a flying saucer, like it's describing something like that. I mean, think about this for a second. And when they went upon their four sides, and they turned not when they went. So they would, it's very linear. Like, I do like the sound effect. It's a very linear motion. As for their rings, they were so high that they were dreadful, and their rings were full of eyes round about them four. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went by them. And when the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up. We are talking about classic UFOs here. This is the description of UFOs. Whithersoever the spirit was to go, they went. Thither was their spirit to go, and the wheels were lifted up over against them. For the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. When those went, these went, and when those stood, these stood, and when those were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up over against them, for the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. And the likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creature was as the color of the terrible crystal stretched forth over their heads above. And under the firmament were their wings straight, the one toward the other. Every one had two, which covered on his side, and every one had two, which covered on that side their bodies. And when they went, I heard the noise of their wings like the noise of great waters, right? As the voice of the Almighty, the voice of speech, as the noise of a host. And they stood, when they stood, they let down their wings. And there was a voice from the firmament that was over their heads when they stood and had let down their wings. And above the firmament was over their heads was the likeness of a throne and the appearance of sapphire stone. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above it. Okay, folks, we are getting a very vivid description in Ezekiel chapter 1 of many of the things people are citing, many of the UFO sightings that people have been talking about for a long time. Folks, we are looking at spiritual beings here, and the Bible says that the God of this world deceives. Listen, the Bible tells us this. It's really, really interesting. We should understand this, right? That the devil is the father of lies. We know that. And he does what he does best. He deceives. And this is exactly what he is doing. He is causing people to believe the lie that there are these UFOs because the world is going to have to come up with an explanation for when Christians are raptured. They're going to make it look very, very natural. Think about it, folks. How is it that life is going to be able to go on and people are going to think they're living their best lives after the rapture takes place? Understand, this whole narrative that we're seeing right now, UFOs and all this other stuff, it is directly related to all of this. And like Tucker said, it's very spiritual. And look at what the world is doing. Folks, I keep saying this all the time. The world believes more about the rapture than some Christians do, right? The devil certainly believes it more than many Christians do. Why? Because he's preparing avidly for it. Shouldn't that tell us something? Should wake up, folks. The Bible is real. God's word is real. And God never gets it wrong. It's time for us to wake up, folks. This is pretty awesome stuff. Christ could come at any moment. All this stuff we're looking at is spiritual. So let's keep our eyes open. Let's stay close to the word of God. And let's continue to look up. Why? Because Christ could come at any moment. Jesus is coming soon. Amen? God bless you guys.